Sonic the Hedgehog, snooping as usual, I see. Roll the video! Now that my channel's 10th anniversary is drawing to a close, I think it's worth sending it off with a remake of an old video. I adore the Sonic the Hedgehog series, and I adore boss battles. So that video? Yeah, we're running it back. Ever since I made my original favorite Sonic bosses list back in 2016, I have played a lot more Sonic games and thus have faced a lot more bosses from this series. While they can vary in quality, the good ones really hit it out of the park and can be legitimate highlights of a game. Now for this list, to meet a compromise between my full personal opinions and game representation, I'm going to only allow a maximum of 3 bosses from a single game to appear on here. It'll be easy to tell where my biases are with that, but I think that's a good number to stick with to avoid repetition. I will also try to watch the amount of final bosses I put on here, and might bend that rule a little bit, so the last bosses fought in separate character stories don't necessarily count towards that quota. Like, I wouldn't really count Mecha Sonic from Sonic 3 and Knuckles towards it, despite being the last boss of Knuckles' story, since the Doomsday Zone feels much more like the game's true final boss. I hope that makes sense. So, with that said, let's begin this list by talking about Knuckles' fight with Mecha Sonic from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. That worked out pretty well. Sonic 3 was already doing a better job than Sonic 1, 2, and CD in terms of its boss lineup, for the most part, but I'm really impressed with how well they pulled off Knuckles' confrontation with this robotic doppelganger. At this point, Sonic and Tails have already fought Mecha Sonic through a couple of encounters in Sky Sanctuary. However, he didn't actually blow up after his defeat there, which is a detail you're likely not going to pay much mind to on your first playthrough. But this makes his reappearance in Knuckles' story a big surprise. It may not seem like much is going on at first, as he doesn't fight that much differently compared to when you fought him as Sonic or Tails. You know, spin dashing, bouncing up and down, and sliding across the floor like he's doing the Cha-Cha slide. But then he heads over to the Master Emerald, and you know how you can potentially go super or hyper through a lot of the game and just become an invincible god? Well, now the tables have turned, and now the boss can do that. Yeah, now throughout most of the fight, Mecha Sonic is completely invulnerable and is able to shoot various projectiles at you, one of which is a blast of rings. Though his super form control isn't perfect, as he'll eventually return to normal after a bit, which is when you're able to damage him. But he'll use every opportunity he has to recharge his super form, so you have to take advantage of your window. Heck, as the fight goes on, he maintains this form better overall, so you have a way smaller time frame to hit him. There's a lot to manage in this fight, but it doesn't feel like it's too much to handle, as each attack is telegraphed and can be manipulated with good positioning, and the openings aren't too unforgiving, while still not being that forgiving. It's really cool to see an enemy character use the power you've constantly been using throughout the game, in a similar way no less, and we get a really fun fight out of it. It's a shame that this creation hasn't made any other notable appearances in other Sonic games. Granted, his role was likely filled in by Metal Sonic, but still, at least he made a strong impression when he did. Even if I sometimes hear Sonic fans express fond memories of the Advance trilogy, I don't hear that much talk about each individual entry on their own, least of all Advance 2. The game does ramp up the speed factor and doesn't have much in platforming compared to other DIMS games, but Advance 2 does all it can with it to deliver an extremely fun adventure, and the bosses, while not anything amazing, are still a really fun time regardless. However, when looking at them all, I can easily call the Egg Frog my favorite without a second thought. At face value, there might be not much the Egg Frog is going for it, with the design not looking that much more creative than the other bosses you fought. But the fight is an easy winner because of how the Egg Frog fights, and the setting you fight it in. Eggman does not just remain at the far right of the screen like the other encounters, he slides around all over the place, with the wheels primarily being the thing you need to watch out for, which means you can hit him wherever he is at the moment, including on the ceiling. I don't mean that in a way where he occasionally attacks from the ceiling, I mean you could use the zone's anti-gravity gimmick to switch surfaces at any time you please. This sounds slight, but the addition of switchable surfaces by your choice does wonders in making the fight more frantic and fun than it would be otherwise, coupled by Eggman using bombs to briefly cloak either the ground or the ceiling, forcing you into whatever surface is clear at the moment. It's really neat that DIMS was able to take the concept of a zone and find a way to incorporate it into a boss fight, without losing the chase down design the game's been using as of this point, and it makes for a fun time to add on to the enjoyable moments that Advance 2 will give you. If I were to think of a Sonic game that overall had a good boss lineup, I would not immediately go to Sonic Rush. I mean, I enjoy the game, but most of the bosses feel like they draw on for way longer than they really should. But silver lining to this boss roster, tee-hee, the part where they have the two playable characters duke it out was really sweet. At this point in the story, both Sonic and Blaze have only just met, and understand clearly that they want to oppose Eggman's schemes. While Sonic welcomes all the extra help, Blaze feels protecting the universe is her responsibility, and chooses to handle the conflict herself, leading to the two butting heads for a bit. Quite literally in the finisher's case. But the fight we get is awesome, because it's a solid playoff between the similarities and differences between Sonic and Blaze's playable characters. Both have similar moves, like their own jumps that they can use to block each other's attacks, their own spin dashes, and their own homing attacks. But because you only get to play as one of them at a time, which depends on which story you picked, the challenge comes from observing and knowing what the other can do, and adapting to it, like Sonic being faster on the ground, and Blaze having more options in the air. Heck, the boss character will also attempt to play with your expectations by adding an attack that the player character can't have. If Blaze is the boss, she can summon a group of fire pillars. If Sonic's the boss, he can use his speed to whip up a tornado that has a suction to it. I totally buy Sonic and Blaze being dimensional counterparts, because this fight showed that the two are more alike than they seem at first. And the fight in general doesn't overstay its welcome, and it's just fun to play through. It's no wonder why Blaze became a mainstay after this. I just hope we can see more of her in the future, outside of spin-offs. I really enjoyed Sonic Superstars. It does a solid job continuing the gameplay style of the Genesis games, and the levels are really fun to play around in, especially with all the Emerald powers. Though, it kinda has the same issue as Sonic Rush when it comes to its bosses. It feels like the devs really didn't want them to die in a couple of seconds like in some of the Genesis games, especially in co-op, but they went a little overboard in a lot of cases. If the boss doesn't have a pattern where you can only hit it once for another attack loop, then they get more invincibility moments than what the game is telling you. With that said though, I still do enjoy quite a few of them, with my personal highlight going to the last boss you fight in the main campaign within the Egg Fortress Zone, which at this point I'm just going to call the Egg Fortress Robot. I don't really like using the term Egg Fortress Zone boss or anything of the sort. After a very trippy level where Eggman not only attempts to blow up his entire fortress with you in it, but also activates a machine that reverses time and causes terrain to revert to where it was and enemies to respawn, he confronts you himself within the core of the ship, ready to take you on with a modified mecha, and the fight we get is very climactic. Between launching missiles, atom bombs, and plasma force fields, and slamming his spike fist down, which temporarily causes the terrain to fall apart for a bit, while the ship fires electric projectiles at you, it's clear that he isn't holding back. Heck, he even guards himself when you inflict the blue atom bombs at him from the front, meaning you have to get behind him in order for the reflection to do damage. I really like this, because it makes good use of the circular perspective, keeps you on the move, and it becomes more of a puzzle as you go on, as you'll need to figure out where the next bomb will land to get the best shot. But after that, he pulls more time shenanigans and says that phase didn't count, and now he's chasing you. Even if you don't have a terrain limit despite what the scenario may tell you, he's got a slew of new attacks that require keen observation to avoid, mixed with a bit of trial and error, but it's not overkill. While you can wait to damage his head before attacking, I really think this phase is a good example of working around his pattern to make the fight go faster. There are some attacks where he is vulnerable despite being out of reach, so there are moments to use the avatars to get a free hit or two in, maybe interrupt an attack while you're at it, or if you know where to launch yourself, you can use the bullet to make your way to the head and hit him that way. Sure, they'll only help out so much, and the fight will still go on for a while regardless, but to me, it didn't feel like it overstayed its welcome. This fight is very satisfying, putting your skills to the test, and feeling like a solid climax to the main campaign. Thankfully, the ship never detonates in this fight. I think there might be a bug in the system stopping the explosion, Baldy McNosehair. You might need to look into that. Sonic Forces, a game I can agree could have been a lot better than it truly was, but a game I think people completely exaggerate the negative qualities of, and a game that I still enjoy. Heck, I even think the boss lineup is reasonably solid. With two exceptions, these fights have a sense of energy to them, and are just fun to take on in general. And with that in mind, I just want to bring up that even if the finale had a few rough patches, with the closure to Infinite being a letdown, and Iron Fortress being a bad level, I'm glad it was able to stand right back up and go strong with the final battle against the Egg Phantom. Okay, yes, I am playing around with names again, since they call this thing the Death Egg Robot, but I want to leave that name to the original bearer, and the Egg Phantom not only sounds better, but also fits contextually. Don't know how that'll work out, but hey, I mess with things a lot. Anywho, now that Infinite's out of the picture, Eggman's pretty much taken matters into his own hands, manipulating Sonic and company to destroy a fake reactor, while he transfers the core power of the Phantom Ruby into the Egg Phantom, joining the heat of battle. And the fight we get afterwards, and after admittedly but thankfully short phase 1 with Classic Sonic, where he just bounces boulders back at him, goes positively nuts. As control shifts over to your avatar, the Egg Phantom's bombarding you with missile barrages, enemy reinforcements, and shockwaves for slamming his fist into the ground. Eggster will even start to shatter the terrain you stand on either by punching or shooting a massive laser. While you can damage him by attacking the arm as he slams it down, damaging the core does more. But leaving that core exposed requires you to get him to slam his fist into position where he leaves it open, which doesn't always happen, and is harder to do with some of the terrain deleted. This phase can get really fun, with the strategy of what position you want the core to be in, and what terrain you can do without, as approaching this wrong can lead to the fight getting harder, or at the best case scenario, taking way longer than it needs to. Combined with the atmosphere and presentation feeling like everything is on the line, it leads to a very tense phase, and then the heart of the robot comes out. Now in this distorted reality, you get to take Modern Sonic, Classic Sonic, and your avatar to chase the Egg Phantom and lay the smackdown. I know many people have written this boss off as a clone of the Negalisp armor and stopped there, and while I don't 100% disagree, I find that really unfortunate because if you ask me, this boss takes some ideas of that one and does something different, or in some cases, more with them, while still managing to be an incredibly fun and actually kind of tricky fight. The Egg Phantom's attacks in this phase, while most are rather telegraphed, don't necessarily have a complete pattern to them, meaning observation is key when the hazards will show up. This will especially get noticeable later on, as you won't have much time to react to them, as the flares on the ground will get into more funky patterns, and he fires giant missiles very quickly. He also never comes close to you to give you a chance to attack. You have to earn it, which will leave an opening that Eggy will gladly take advantage of if you do it wrong. This fight can get very frantic with what's being thrown at you, and with rings and boost whips not always popping up. But man, it is so much fun to work with all of this, and so satisfying to land that final triple boost. I'd be lying if I said Sonic Forces was a game I had no problems with, and if I said it's a Sonic game I'd come back to over and over and over again, but the good moments far outweigh the bad for me, and this final clash was definitely a moment that made it all worth it. I had to include at least one battle with Metal Sonic on here. With how often he has shown up in the series, he's had a multitude of great encounters, with the original in CD being among my least favorite ones that I faced. Yeah, I totally get how iconic it is, considering it was more of a race when Sonic hadn't really done that up to that point, and was bound to leave an impression since it was Metal Sonic's debut after all, but that's sort of where the positives end for me. I don't think him basically being immune to terrain was a great way to shake things up, and not being able to mess with him kinda removes the fun of it being a race. Not to mention, I'm not a fan of this course. So, nuts to that. Here's the one I'm going with. Taking the best aspects of my favorite level from Sonic CD was already awesome, but man, did they pull out all the stocks for this rematch with Metal Sonic. Things start off pretty simple enough as you scale the speedway while avoiding his electric charges and rolling attacks, but partway through, Metal Sonic hooks up to a machine to deploy little 8-bit Silver Sonic bots, which is a really cute reference to the Game Gear games, while firing electric projectiles at you. These little drones are the only way to damage Metal Sonic, and you get them to fly all over the place by bouncing into them, by jumping or spin dashing. But since they don't hit the boss automatically, the key is guiding them over to where Metal Sonic is for the hit to count, which is really inventive and fun. You can also damage him by killing the Silver Sonic and getting the residue to fly up, which will count. But then we get to the second phase on top of the Eggman Tower. In Mania's initial release, you'd be chased by a spiked wall while duking it out with Metal Sonic, but the Plus expansion changes this phase completely by letting him absorb the Phantom Rupee and turn it to Giga Metal, likely a reference to Knuckles' Chaotix. Now he's chasing you through a collapsing course, while firing lasers and bombs that can distract you if you're not careful. While his weak point is pretty obvious, one of his arms is protecting it when it's raised, so you don't always have the best opportunities to ram into it. There's a lot going on in this battle, but not only is it not a headache, it's a representation of things people love about Metal Sonic, and his numerous appearances. Definitely my favorite of all the encounters with him. Having a supernatural deity be the final boss of a Sonic game can work depending on the context, but no matter which one people generally prefer, I'm sure most of us remember the one that made it popular to begin with. Perfect Chaos! It was already very natural to have the finale be against this form of chaos, given that it was basically only been with Eggman because he could reliably get the Chaos Emeralds, only to betray him once they were all obtained, so his reign of destruction can continue. So yeah, absorb the positive energy of the Chaos Emeralds, and go fight the giant water snake like it's Tuesday. On the surface, the gameplay of this fight is pretty straightforward, with keeping up the speed needed to damage Perfect Chaos, but it's how this boost works, and the amount of stuff flying your way that really makes this fight fun. You can get the speed you need from a single boost pad, but you can't get hit in order to keep it. They'll start becoming less frequent towards the end of the section you're in, where chaos is, and if you don't have the speed needed, you'll just go to another section without actually damaging the boss. And this becomes an issue because being a supersonic fight, your rings are constantly draining, and losing them all is an instant loss. While the sections do loop after a while, and they have plenty of rings for you, these rings do not come back should you revisit it, so you have to take full advantage of it. Between all this, and with how perfect chaos gets increasingly more chaotic with all its projectiles and lasers, it is satisfying to find ways around all this madness, and continually strike its weak point, as it is to do it with Open Your Heart playing in the background during the first half. This final battle has remained iconic for a reason, and needs a rush of excitement every single time. It's no wonder why Sega proceeded to make an ice replica of him in Mario Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games, before bringing him back for a rematch in Sonic Generations. He's definitely left his mark on the series.
All's well that ends well, right?
Tails, Station Square is completely destroyed. Sonic 3 and Knuckles had a lot more inventive boss designs and more fun ways to interact with each opponent beyond just wailing away until they die compared to its predecessors, though some are still like that, and there are a couple that don't exactly work. But I'm glad that one of my personal favorites was saved for near the end. After going through a reconstructed Death Egg that loves its anti-gravity gimmicks, including one for a boss fought beforehand, it's a safe assumption that Eggman would yank out something special for the final confrontation. But even with that in mind, I was taken aback when the mech he gets out just completely towers over Sonic. I was excited based on this, the scenario fighting it out in space, the sound of its footsteps, and the slow intro to the boss theme kicking in, and the fight more than delivers. In Phase 1, the giant Eggman robot will largely try to clamp down on you with its metallic fingers, much like what the robotic hand in Lava Reef Zone tried to do. The challenge comes from finding optimal ways to take out these fingers, since they're open for a very short amount of time. I personally recommend spin dashing to get as many hits in at once, since you have to take down 6. Positioning and timing absolutely matters in this one, as they do in Phase 2. The giant Eggman Robo's weak spot is the capsule where their Master Emerald is being held, which needs to be opened by hitting the metal covering it. But not only are there fireballs coming out of the robot's nose, you should probably get that looked at, but the robot is constantly walking towards you while taking out the surface that you're on. What's even more dangerous is that if you do expose the capsule, you have a moment before it fires a laser before closing, so you have to know when's a good time to get a hit in, and when do you give yourself room to dodge that laser. Should you survive all that, the fight will end with you running after Eggy as he attempts to run away with the Master Emerald, so you have to bonk him while staying ahead of the crumbling surface. This fight has a lot going on, but the tension feels just right, and I always love finding ways to beat this boss as best as possible. Heck, I think the devs wanted you to appreciate the fight with all attention, since the arena has no rings for you to collect. So either you gotta stick to the ring stock you've held onto throughout the previous level, or do this fight with absolutely no rings whatsoever. I've beaten the giant Eggman Robo many times with no rings, and I grew to love thinking more strategically and making sure each jump and each spin dash counted. This fight is absolutely phenomenal, and I'm glad it was saved for the tail end of this excellent game, and after it's a good gateway for the Doomsday Zone afterwards if you got all the emeralds. I was ecstatic to see the bosses of Sonic Frontiers be all supersonic encounters, and for the game to take full advantage of the spectacle and power at its fingertips to deliver some of the most climactic encounters in any Sonic game. With the exception of Supreme, I adored every encounter with how you can interact with each of the Titans, and how you could easily deliver the smackdown. And I'm gonna start off this praise by fighting the Knight. Wait, hold on, I actually cued the wrong music. Let me change it and start over. There we go, that's more like it. Right off the bat, Knight already has a lot going for it. It has a shield that can grow saw blades at its edges, and can be thrown Captain America style, which you get a taste of long before actually confronting it, and its sword is not only huge, but it can even be extended, and the wheels on its feet allow it to be far more agile than the other Titans. So Knight has got plenty of weapons and its artillery to use on you. In the first part of the fight, it only tries to use its speed to throw you off, but even if you catch up to it, it can easily use its shield to block incoming attacks. You can continue attacking it and trigger a sequence of riding the shield to stun the Titan, or you can easily swerve behind it and attack the head with all you've got. Remembering that last one is key in order to progress the fight. Things only get upped in Phase 2, as now you have to worry about its shield bouncing around the arena, and the only way to stun Knight now is to parry the shield and throw it back. That last one requires predicting where Knight will be in a bit, since it can easily roll out of the way if you throw the shield dead at it. Even if you manage to get some damage in, you'll need to keep an eye open as Knight can easily retaliate at any time. But if you do and diversify the attacks, you could easily do stuff like having light spears impale it in a side loop sequence, or knock it around like a pinball in an absolutely boss Grand Slam sequence. The only thing more boss than it is how the fight ends, as Sonic punches Knight's sword away, side-loops into Commandeer for himself, and then remembers that one game where he used the sword, and then one time Raiden cut a Metal Gear Ray in half, and thinks, I want to do that, and finishes the Titan off by splitting it in half. That was crazy, but absolutely incredible. This fight not only has some amazing supersonic moments, but it also makes very practical use of a lot of Sonic's kit, and rewards you for making the best out of knowing when to attack against a much smarter opponent. It's a spectacular fight, backed by a breathtaking piece of music. Almost every vocal track in this game is great, especially the boss themes, but Find Your Flame really heightens the adrenaline in its own way, and stands as tall and proud as the Knight and its fight themselves. And oh, trust me, we're only scratching the surface with these battles on here. This guy right here is Shadow, one of the most popular characters in the whole canon, and one of my personal favorites writing-wise, whenever he serves a solid role in the plot, instead of being just a rival. He also roller skates.
They're air shoes.
It's understandable why Shadow has become so popular, given he was given both a strong debut as a character, and an incredibly fun and memorable boss fight in Sonic Adventure 2. By the latter, I mean the second fight between him and Sonic on the Space Colony arc. Right off the bat, you have an incredibly memorable concept for a fight between these two. At this point, Sonic's on his way to stop the Eclipse Cannon from firing so he can save the planet, and Shadow wants to ensure the Chaos Emeralds activate the Arc's collision course to fulfill what he thinks is the wish of the late Mario Robotnik. So the ensuing high-speed duel takes place on a long road on the way to a space cannon, and like Sonic vs. Blaze from earlier, the Hedgehog you're playing as depends on the story, with Sonic being playable and Shadow being the boss in the hero story, and vice versa in the Dark story. But the fight plays out similarly regardless. Both Sonic and Shadow can repel each other's homing attacks by jumping, like in the first fight, so it's important to know when the boss is open for an attack. That's more of a tense task here, considering the road you're fighting on is constantly collapsing, and the boss will unleash a projectile if they get too far ahead of you. Heck, they'll even teleport ahead if they fall into the pit, or you get too far ahead of them. This is a fight that is simple, yet incredibly effective in playstyle. It incentivizes staying on the move, and looking for chances to strike that would be difficult to replicate in a multiplayer setting, something the other character bosses really don't have. And it ended up being one of the best parts of the game because of that. And because of Shadow's popularity, calling back to this fight in Sonic Generations seemed like a very logical thing to do, even if that fight's nowhere near as good. There's a reason I've been bringing up Generations callbacks for a few segments now. Despite not featuring any until this segment, Generations is one of my favorite boss rosters in the series. Almost every one of them is a blast to fight, and with the updates made for the source material, they all feel brand new. But if you ask me, the biggest flex of this boss roster was pretty much Silver the Hedgehog's how it started versus how it's going moment. Even before taking into account how shocking an improvement this fight is compared to the one in 06, where an improvement would be more by expectation rather than an accomplishment, this is still an excellent boss battle in its own right. Silver will not only use his psychokinesis to grab and throw debris found on the track at you, but he also tries to hammer you from above, make a battering ram, create psychic knives that need to be avoided, and makes a giant bowling ball that takes up the whole road when he's on his last hit. But on top of that, the ways you interact with these to do damage to him are really cool. Running across his own battering ram is one thing, but using the homing attack on the debris he's carrying to close in on him? Oh man, that's creative use as I've ever seen it. The fact that he falls into his own ball of trash when he's defeated is honestly the cherry on top of this wonderful duel. This is a really good reflection of what Generations did with previous bosses, and a gameplay moment I love coming back to again and again for a fun time, even if I already have an S rank on it. Sonic Colors, Ultimate or otherwise, still remains my personal favorite game in the series. Between the really enjoyable way it executed its extremely basic plot, all the amazing and imaginative levels, and the really fun bosses made this a wonderful experience. Those who have seen my previous videos know exactly where this is going, but might be surprised that the Nega-Wisp armor isn't number 1. While yes, it has been knocked down a few pegs when I started to think about it more, my overall opinion on this fight hasn't changed all that much, and I still believe it deserved the number 1 it got last time. It already gets points for the atmosphere of dueling Eggman and a rather menacing looking robot on a long stretch of road in space, while its amusement park that you were just in gets consumed in a giant explosion, complete with 2 phenomenal boss themes, the second of which is an orchestral version of Reach for the Stars, which, yes. But the fight, despite its relative straightforwardness, is really fun to play. Throughout the whole game, you've been using the Wisp to discover a ton of new paths and make quick work of previous bosses. So for this final battle, the game decides to let your opponent use them. The Nega-Wisp armor has several different attacks that only get faster and more erratic the further you go, but Baldy Magnosaur also likes to combine more than one Wisp to throw you for a loop. On top of all that, Eggman will only be open if you successfully manage to dodge a certain amount of attacks, which grows in number the more damage you do. This isn't too bad early on, but it can get hairy in later parts, especially since you only get rings by damaging him. They're not out in the open except for this one little batch as soon as the fight starts. This fight in general is not only a spectacle to witness with all the camera work and special effects on display, but it has this feeling like Eggman's truly going desperate, as he does have the power he wants to rule the universe, and wants to at least make sure he uses what he has to eliminate his nemesis, because his plans are literally going up in plumes of debris. Heck, the Nightwisp armor itself catching fire as you deal more damage is another big indicator. And the final color blaster used to finish him never gets old. I do wish the fight were a little longer and that he had a few more attacks that combined Wisp powers, but what's here is such a fun and climactic duel for a spectacle of a game to close out on. I adore Colors. I adore it so much. Despite what I previously said about how tensions felt regarding Eggman and the Nightwisp armor fight, I wouldn't exactly say it's the fight that feels the most like a battle of arch nemesis, and that's because Unleashed has a candidate that I say is more worthy of that. It's very thematically appropriate that the final moments you get to have with the Werehog would be against the guy who literally turned Sonic into this, especially considering how all the Werehog's bosses as of this point have been against Dark Gaia spawns, while Sonic has been fighting Eggman's creations, and Sonic has already used the Chaos Emeralds to put the planet back together, with the exception of one continent. So with Sonic not only wanting to stop Eggman like he usually does, with a bit of revenge for turning him into the Werehog to begin with, and Eggman looking to crush Sonic with the new power he has, the two engage each other while plummeting down a giant shaft. Side note, if you want to make a boss battle the slightest bit awesome, have it take place while falling down a giant shaft. It usually works. Now that you're on a modestly sized platform in this shaft, the Egg Dragoon will spend the fight unloading its entire arsenal your way, from fiery bullets, to an ice cannon that can freeze you, to a drill that has good range and leaves electric residue behind for a bit, to even his own infantry for assistance. It feels like he's fighting with everything he's got. You don't even beat it by just beelining into him a few times. This is the Werehog we're talking about, so you just get to wail away at the weak point with punches, kicks, and claw swipes. When he gets to a certain health point, you actually get to rip pieces of the Egg Dragoon off, and it feels great! Things get even more nuts when Eggman not only gets more erratic with his attacks, but he also uses his drill to destroy the platforms you're standing on as you fall further towards the planet's core. And the way it ends with you getting to rip out the Egg-O-Matic and throw Eggman as the machine crumbles, oh, that's satisfying. Sonic Unleashed definitely has its shortcomings, but its strong points definitely show how it tries to be the best it can be, and in my opinion, succeeds in doing so in most instances. And this battle is one of the first things I think of when I think about this game, and it's still my favorite Eggman duel to date. Really happy it came back for a round against normal Sonic and Generations. And another round against Classic Sonic and Forces, but these two are definitely better. And now, we praise Frontiers' boss lineup for the rest of the video. I'm being serious when I say that because of all the reasons brought up in the Night segment, the Titan battles are probably my favorite set of bosses in the series. And while Night showed off what it could do spectacularly, and the Max 3 bosses rule prevented Giganto from getting on here, despite absolutely loving that battle, Wyvern definitely left the best impression on me with everything it had going for it. I mean, the setting is literally oozing spectacle from frame 1. You're duking it out with a mechanical dragon, while both of you are flying over an island that you were literally just exploring for the past few hours. And that mechanical dragon is firing missiles that you could parry to catch up to it, to eventually parry its melee strikes and gain an opening to attack. Chasing this mecha lizard throughout Ares Island not only feels liberating, but making more integral use of the parry feels super satisfying, further amplified by being able to shackle it in chains with the side loop, and potentially throwing it into a mountain. And when the fight goes on, not only does it get more aggressive, not only will you need to stun it by parrying 2 attacks instead of just 1, but it breaks out of the chains more easily so it's harder to keep pinned down. But it's a fair trade-off when you get to stop it from flying at you at dangerously fast speeds, kick a giant bowl of missiles at it, and eventually defeat it by tricking the missiles to fly in its own mouth to blow it up. This fight is absolutely absurd, but it's just the right kind I expected to see after Giganto left a strong impression. It not only looks amazing, but it plays out really well, and it feels rewarding to pull a lot of this stuff off. And like the others, Wyvern's got a sick vocal track backing it up. Breakthrough It All is the very definition of blood pumping, and it really suits the mood of this phenomenal battle, especially with the chanting in the first chorus. Out of the first 3 Titans, this one is hands down my favorite, and I honestly considered putting this at number 1 when first playing this list. Alas. Giganto from Sonic Frontiers would have made the cut if I didn't have the Max 3 boss rule in place. One of my favorite first bosses, and a perfect first Titan for Frontiers. The Frigate Orkin and Frigate Scullion from Sonic Colors. immensely energetic battles have some satisfying use of the Wisp powers. Scullion also gets points for including meteors, keeping with the zone's theme. The Dark Queen from Sonic and the Black Knight can be beaten in a minute, but the presentation, storytelling, and cutscenes beforehand are spectacular. Solaris from Sonic 06, getting to play as 3 superpowered hedgehogs fighting a spatial deity with friends cheering you on, and an orchestral version of his world playing is pretty awesome. Goes to show that 06 does have its moments. Though why am I reminded of a British YouTuber? The Phantom King and Kleptomobile from Sonic Mania. Setting is awesome, and I like how the Phantom King can actually hurt Super Sonic. I just wish there was more to this fight. Metal Sonic from Sonic 4 Episode 2. It was a toss-up between this and the Forces fight with him, but I like the setting and the way Metal Sonic fights here more. Metal Sonic, Perfect Chaos, and the Egg Dragoon from Sonic Generations. All fantastic callbacks to their respective fights that expand upon the original's idea, while still being fun to fight. The Metal Fighter from Sonic Superstars. Amazing that it takes on the appearance of your custom robot, and the fight can get really intense. E101 Beta Mark II from Sonic Adventure. Really engaging and poignant filler content. I'm surprised they went as hard as they did with this. And finally, the Super Egg Robo from the 3DS version of Sonic Lost World. Really creative use of the Wisp powers, especially on hard mode, and I do like the added voice lines for Eggman to show how seriously he's taking this. Leagues better from how much of a pushover this fight is in the Wii U version. Sonic Frontiers may have found its place among my favorite Sonic games, but one problem I and many others had with it was that the ending was pretty underwhelming. I enjoy the final island for its fun platforming challenges and enemies, but Supreme wasn't all that impressive as a boss, and the battle with the end being a game of Ikaruga was a letdown. It didn't do much to sully my opinion on the game, but still, not the best conclusion. But some might be wondering what's going on now that I have spoken for every boss in Frontiers' campaign. And to that I'd say that we need to look into the final update Frontiers got earlier this year, the Final Horizon. It was really cool that we got some neat quality of life features in updates prior, but the Final Horizon giving us a playable Amy, Knuckles, and Tails, and platforming challenges for them was legitimately really great to see. Even the towers were really fun obstacle courses, but perhaps the biggest improvement is what took this #1 spot. After mastering Master King Coco's trial, and beating Supreme about as easily as the base game, seeing the end cut the escape plan and directly connect itself to Supreme, creating an Eldritch Horror of a Titan, was both surprising and really cool. Seriously, with the arms just sprouting out of its back, and with it now moving on all fours, the end actually looks very unnerving. But it's also great to see Super Sonic fully control the new power gained from the trials to become even stronger. This is reflected in gameplay, as Super Sonic normally can't parry these corrupted spheres the end throws at you, but then he can after transforming. Parrying these is important because every hit will actually decrease your max rain count. This caught me off guard when I first noticed it, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal unless you're careless or you're doing a challenge run. But beyond the end's other attacks and ways to stop you from potential big damage, the thing you want to do first is take out the wire in the boss's neck. The end's health regenerates when that thing is in, so it's important to use the side shuffle in order to get behind the boss's head and take out that wire. Maybe do it instantly if you have a quick side loop ready. Things get even crazier when you're able to steal Supreme's gun, let Eggman come in and hook the Eggomatic up to it, and have Sage and your friends protect him, letting you finish the fight. This is not just for spectacle. The end can attack Sage and the others for big damage if you wait too long without parrying the move it needs to do so. Not only that, but to add to the challenge, the first corrupted sphere that hits you will not only decrease your max ring count, but will also decrease your current ring count to 100. The cutscene when this happens looks incredible, but the consequence from this adds on a lot of tension to the fight. Heck, this part can outright kill you if you're below 100 rings by that point. The fight in general has some of the coolest moments in any Sonic boss, from that breathtaking Grand Slam where Sonic goes full Virgil on the end, to Sonic flat out squishing it between two massive light platforms, to the boss running like a feral animal in an attempt to squish Sonic, only for him to just blow that off. But these moments are earned by playing really well, knowing when to attack, knowing when to parry, and knowing when to use the other parts of your kit to outmaneuver everything. It's a treat to watch and super satisfying. Having all that backed by two magnificent arrangements of I'm Here, one fully orchestrated a la Solaris Phase 2, Perfect Dark Gaia, and Nega Whisperer Phase 2, and a vocal rock rendition by Kellen Quinn, which I massively prefer over the original one, just make things even better. It all comes together when Sonic just pummels the Titan sky high before going all out with his cyber power to become a bullet of sheer plasma that just turns Supreme into a pile of dust and absolutely totals the end. This fight is everything I want out of a boss battle and then some, let alone a Sonic boss. It tests you in what you know about Frontiers' combat, and rewards you with some incredible imagery and fun ways to take down this titan. It legit took an ending that had some really nice moments from a story perspective, but not as much in terms of gameplay, and turned it into the ending that Frontiers absolutely deserved. Frontiers in general could have definitely been better in places. Heck, there's a lot about the Final Horizon I think could have been improved. But when it does well, man, it does absolutely spectacularly. And this fight feels like a culmination of everything every dev wanted to do. It not only deserves to be at the top of this list, but also among my favorite bosses in any game. I am the Lightning Ripper, and I sincerely wish the Sonic series the best, moving on to New Horizons. See you all next year!